Hey, good morning. It's good to have each one with us again today. For those that may not have caught our first lesson last week, uh, my name's J.C. Trivette. I'm a member of Liberty Grove Baptist Church and teach the Through the Bible class there at the church. Uh, we are going to continue this morning our study in Matthew chapter 20. Beginning with verse 17, if you want to be finding your place. We talked last week about the parable of the vineyard workers or parable of the laborers. I told you that we needed to also think of that as the parable of the generous landowner, because we know that the landowner is God, and he was showing grace by giving those that got in last just as much as he did those that got in first. So we'll go with verse 17 today. Says, "And Jesus, going up to Jerusalem, took the 12 disciples apart in the way, and said unto them," and we know that from the other Gospels, we got Matthew, Mark, and Luke that are called the Synoptic Gospels, which just means that they go along with each other. They're generally in the same chronological order. So whereas maybe book of John has some different things in it. And of course the reason for that is each one of the gospel writers had a specific audience that they were speaking to, had a specific plan, I guess would be the word, for what they wanted to bring out in their gospel. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are the synoptic gospels. So we know from them that this going up was from Jericho. If you look at a map, the map actually looks like from Jericho you're going down, but going up references the fact that Jerusalem was up in the mountains. They had to go up to get there. Also, it'd be like us saying, we're going up to Beach Mountain. Beach Mountain from here, we normally would say we're going over to Boone, but most of the time we would say we're going up to Beach Mountain because we would climb in elevation. So that's the reason for that. Verse 18 says, "Behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and shall deliver him to the Gentiles to mock, and to scourge, and to crucify him. And the third day he shall rise again." If you've got a red letter Bible, 18 and 19 is the words of Jesus. I don't think this would have been a surprise to the disciples that they were going to Jerusalem. They have been headed toward Jerusalem now for a pretty good while, knowing that the Passover was coming, and I'm sure they were anticipating being in Jerusalem for the Passover. They just didn't know what else was going to happen. Another thing about this going up from Jericho, a lot of Bibles have maps in the back of them, or you may have seen a map at some time of the travels or journeys of Jesus. And as far as we know, this is the only time that he was in Jericho. And wonder if it might have been sort of like, you remember when he went through Samaria, he said, "I must needs go through Samaria." Normally, a Jew would not have done that. Normally, they would have bypassed Samaria. But there was a woman at the well that needed Jesus. So with Jericho, may have been the same thing, that he needed to be there for a specific reason. So this is really the fifth time that in the book of Matthew that Jesus has mentioned something about his death. The third time that he's been pretty specific. But I wanted us to go back and look at those this morning. So if you want to turn back to Matthew chapter 12, that will be where the first one is. And that's verse 38 through 42. It says, Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. And of course, when they're addressing him as master, it would be like us saying teacher. They were not giving him some sort of religious authority. That was not their purpose there. Their purpose was to try to catch him in something. So they wanted to see a sign. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas. And behold, a greater than Jonas is here. Jonas, of course, being Jonah. And Jesus saying that the men of Nineveh did repent, whereas the men of the Jewish nation had not repented. And then he also says, The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here. Present, now. That's what he's saying. So that's the first time he's telling them he'll be 3 days and 3 nights. So then if you want to turn to chapter 16 and verse 21. It says, From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem. So from that time forth, Jesus just has mentioned the church. It's just before this is where he told Peter that he would be the rock. All that has happened. So from that time forth, and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day. So this, again, is him predicting that. Then Peter took him and began to rebuke him, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. But he turned and said unto Peter, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me, for thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. Now, of course, Peter being the one that always jumped to conclusions, the one that always spoke first, seemed to be a spokesman for all of the disciples. He got rebuked here. It was a rebuke of Satan, but also of Peter. Jesus telling them what was going to happen. Then in chapter 17, verse 9, it says, And as they came down from the mountain, Jesus charged them. This is after the transfiguration. They're coming down from the mountain. And of course, Peter, James, and John, the three, were there at the transfiguration. So as they were coming down from the mountain, saying, Tell the vision to no man until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come? That, of course, is Elijah. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Elias truly shall first come and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elias is come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of John the Baptist. So Jesus is telling them that he's going to suffer, that he says likewise. So had the disciples been listening with a spiritual ear, they should have caught on to what Jesus was saying. But they still hadn't really accepted it. Were still thinking that this was going to be an earthly kingdom that Jesus would set up. We know that some of the disciples were members of the Zealots, and the Zealots were those that wanted to do away with Roman rule, become the Jewish nation again. So they were still thinking earthly. Then go to chapter 17 and verse 22, and he says, And while they abode in Galilee, Jesus said unto them, The Son of Man shall be betrayed into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and the third day he shall be raised again. And they were exceeding sorry, or sorrowful, your Bible may have. So again, Jesus tells them, each time he tells them something, he reveals a little more about his death and how it's going to happen. So then, if we go to our verses for today, chapter 7 or 20, verse 18. So behold, we, us, all of us, go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be betrayed unto the chief priests and unto the scribes, and they shall condemn him to death. Some things that we need to catch here is Jesus already told them once that he would be betrayed. Now he's telling them again that he will be betrayed. And remember, Judas is still among them. He's still playing the part of a true disciple when we find out later that he was not. But he says he's going to be betrayed, and then it is to the chief priests and the scribes. So he's telling them exactly how this is going to happen. Those people down through the years, even centuries, that have tried to claim that Jesus set all this up, that he had made arrangements before all this happened for this scenario to be worked out. That's just not possible. He knew exactly who he would be betrayed to. He knew exactly who would have him killed. The Romans, the Sanhedrin, really didn't have the authority to have someone put to death. They had to go and ask of the Romans to do that. We do have instances with Stephen, for one, where they didn't go to the Romans, but they were supposed to go to the Romans in order to have someone put to death. So Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. It says that the chief priests and scribes will condemn him to death and then deliver him to the Gentiles, which would be the Romans, to mock. If you were going to arrange something like this, you wouldn't arrange for people to pluck out your beard. You wouldn't arrange for people to smite you on the face or to spit on you. You wouldn't arrange to be beaten like Jesus was beaten. So it's just ludicrous to me for people to think that this could have all been arranged. So he says he'll deliver him to the Gentiles to mock and to scourge. He knew that he was going to be scourged, and to crucify him. And only the Romans had that ability to crucify people. Crucifixion was not the only form of capital punishment that the Romans had. They invented ways of killing people. But Jesus knew that he would be crucified. And the third day he shall rise again. There again, predicting the resurrection that we're so thankful for. Then came to him the mother of Zebedee's children with her sons. And from other scripture, most Bible scholars believe that Salome, that traveled with Jesus, that was at the crucifixion, that went to the tomb in the hopes of putting spices on his body, that Salome was James and John's mother, wife of Zebedee, of course. And so she, like any mother of that time or any mother today, she just wanted the best for her kids. So it says that she came worshiping him. Other versions of the Bible say kneeling before him and desiring a certain thing of him. The other thing about Salome is that a lot of Bible scholars believe that she may have been Jesus' aunt. Mary's sister is mentioned in Scripture, and a lot of scholars believe that that was Salome, and therefore she would have been Jesus' aunt, which would make James and John Jesus' cousins. So verse 21, and he said unto her, What wilt thou? What do you want? She saith unto him, Grant that these my two sons may sit, the one on thy right hand and the other on the left in thy kingdom. And of course that in earthly terms meant that they would have been his second and third in command. One on the right, one on the left. Asking for something that tells us that they were still thinking of this as an earthly kingdom. If you go back to chapter 19 that we read some of last week, verse 28, Jesus tells them that they will sit upon 12 thrones. So the natural thinking there would be, I want my sons to be on the thrones the closest to Jesus. I want my sons, the other two synoptic gospels, Mark and Luke, don't mention her. They just mention that the sons went to Jesus and asked. And the only explanation I could think of that would be that Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses. And Matthew was an eyewitness. As one of the original apostles, he would have seen what was going on. So, whether that's it or not, I don't know. But she's asking for something that she tells us that they have not yet picked up on what kind of kingdom that Jesus will have. But Jesus answered and said, Ye know not what ye ask. You don't know what you're asking, because they still aren't looking with spiritual eyes. Are ye able to drink of the cup that I shall drink of, and to be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? They say unto him, We are able. That's James and John. Yeah, we can do it. We've been your followers. We know what you've taught. We can do it. Not realizing really what Jesus is saying. That cup that he's talking about here is a metaphor for the suffering that he's going to have to go through. And historically, we know that James and John did have to suffer. James was the first of the apostles to be killed. John, tradition says, died a natural death, but suffered greatly. On the Isle of Patmos, tradition says he was boiled in oil. So they did drink of that cup of suffering. You remember in the Garden of Gethsemane when Jesus was praying, he asked that the Father that this cup may pass from him. That's what he's talking about here, is that metaphor for the suffering. So they said, yeah, we're able, we can do it. And he saith unto them, ye shall drink indeed of my cup, which tells us Jesus knew what would happen to them. He was very aware of what they would face. And be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. To me, there he's talking about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The word for baptized here is immersion. We know that when John the Baptist baptized Jesus, that John saw heaven open and the dove descending on Jesus. God said, this is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. So that to me is the baptism that he's talking about here. And they will receive that baptism on the day of Pentecost. But to sit on my right hand and on my left hand is not mine to give, but it shall be given to them for whom it is prepared of my Father. So Jesus is relinquishing power, I guess would be a good way to say that, to the Father. He is being subordinate to the Father, realizing that the Father has all the power. And when the 10 heard it, they were moved with indignation against the two brethren. So remember, they're all here together, all those people that are following Jesus. And so they're where they can hear what Salome has asked, what Jesus has told the two brothers. And when the other 10 hear it, and remember, Peter is in that group. I mentioned a while ago, Peter's sort of been the lead person in the disciples. So naturally, he doesn't want his leadership position messed with. The other disciples have been just as faithful to Jesus in following him, so they don't want James and John to be given a position over them either. So they hear it moved with indignation, mainly, I'd say, jealousy. Mentioned last week about our workplace situations. How often someone that truly deserves a promotion gets the promotion, but the co-workers are jealous of that person and start to murmur. We talked about murmuring last week. But Jesus called them unto him and said, ye know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. The Gentiles here, because Rome was the predominant government at this time, he's talking about the hierarchy in the Roman government. You had Caesar, then you had generals, you had proconsuls under Caesar, then you had generals under them, just like rank in the army. So they have dominion over their people, and they also exercise authority upon their people. You didn't want to make somebody that had a higher rank than you mad. It was absolutely not advisable. But then in 26 he says, but it shall not be so among you disciples, but also among the church that will start later. But whosoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And the word he uses there for minister is actually the word servant. And whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. And that, the word that's used there in the Greek can be bondservant or slave. I think a lot of translations translate it as slave. We talked about the difference in the servant versus the slave last week. So Jesus is getting the point across that he made already back in what we talked about last week in verse 16. It says, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And if you remember, I said we should look at that as the first now shall be last then, and the last now shall be first then. So he's just reiterating what he's already said and making a point to them to help them understand what being a servant is all about. So he says, and whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant or slave, even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many. And this whole time that they have traveled with Jesus, they have seen him minister over and over and over and over. They're supposed to be learning how to do that, learning how to be subordinate rather than the head honcho. So Jesus says he came not to be ministered unto, to have people doing things for him, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. And that ransom was the price that was paid to redeem a slave. Redemption is a wonderful thing, that Jesus was the ransom for our soul, that he paid the price that was necessary. I mentioned too here that I heard a story one time about somebody had dreamed that they went to heaven and were at the banquet, at the supper table. And the chair at the end of a very long table was empty. And they just assumed that that was Jesus's chair, that would be where Jesus sat. So food was being served, everything was being done, and still no sign of Jesus. So finally, he leaned over to somebody and said, well, I see all these that are serving, and I see all those that have been saved, but where is Jesus? I expected Jesus to be here. And the reply was, well, don't you know he's the one serving us? He's the master that's serving his people. So I think that's a good example of Jesus being the servant. So verse 29 then begins to talk about Jesus healing the blind man. Mark and Luke tell us that it was a blind man, one. Matthew here tells us that it's two blind men. He doesn't mention a name. Mark and Luke tell us that it was Bartimaeus. So let's turn over and look at those stories right quick. So Mark chapter 10 will be the first one, starting with verse 46. It says, "And they came to Jericho, and as they went out of Jericho with his disciples and a great number of people, blind Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus, sat by the wayside begging. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." So he had heard about Jesus some way. He had heard the rumors about Jesus. I'm sure people were talking about this healer. We're talking about this teacher that was traveling around the countryside. So he had heard about him, heard about the miracles that he had performed, I'm sure. So he says, Jesus, thou son of David, bestowing on Jesus the fact that he was the Messiah. I think it's interesting that here's a blind man, but he has more spiritual insight than those that could actually see Jesus. Spiritually speaking, he understood who Jesus was. And many charged him that he should hold his peace, but he cried the more a great deal, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. And they called the blind man, saying unto him, Be of good comfort, rise, he calleth thee. And he, casting away his garment, rose and came to Jesus. And Jesus answered and said unto him, What wilt thou that I should do unto thee? The blind man said unto him, Lord, that I might receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, Go thy way, thy faith hath made thee whole. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus in the way. Then over to Luke chapter 18, and that'll be verse 35. It says, And it came to pass that as he was come nigh unto Jericho, a certain blind man sat by the wayside begging. And hearing the multitude pass by, he asked what it meant. And they told him that Jesus of Nazareth passeth by. And he cried, saying, Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me. And they which went before rebuked him, that he should hold his peace. But he cried so much the more, Thou son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stood and commanded him to be brought unto him. And when he was come near, he asked him, saying, What wilt thou that I shall do unto thee? And he said, Lord, that I may receive my sight. And Jesus said unto him, Receive thy sight, thy faith hath saved thee. And immediately he received his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise unto God. So back to Matthew, chapter 20, verse 29. Little bit of a different take from Matthew. There again, it may be because Matthew was an eyewitness. Matthew knew what had happened. May also be because Bartimaeus was the more popular one of these two, and people would have recognized his name when Mark and Luke wrote their Gospels. So it doesn't really matter, but Matthew says there were two. So he says, And as they departed from Jericho, a great multitude followed him. And behold, two blind men sitting by the wayside, when they heard that Jesus passed by, cried out, saying, Have mercy on us, O Lord, thou Son of David. Two blind men who just happened to be sitting beside the road, who just happened to be where Jesus was coming by on the exact day that Jesus was coming by. Do you think that was a coincidence? I don't think so. I think, just like I said earlier, Jesus said he needed to go to Samaria. I think he needed to go to Jericho for the same reason. There was somebody there that needed him. So it says the multitude rebuked them. So you can just hear this crowd say, no, don't bother the master. He's got better things to do. Don't interfere with his ministry when he just has told the disciples that his ministry is to serve, that he came to minister to people. And the multitude rebuked them because they should hold their peace. But they cried the more, saying, have mercy on us, O Lord, thou Son of David. And Jesus stood still and called them and said, what will ye that I shall do unto you? What, knowing Jesus and knowing his ministry, what would you expect him to do? Exactly what he did do. He stood still and ministered to them. It was what he just had told them he'd come for. So, what do you want me to do? He says. They say unto him, Lord, that our eyes may be opened. So Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes. You know, we have in the Gospels all different ways that Jesus healed people. Some people were healed immediately. Some people had to do something that showed that they were willing to display their faith. Some people had to do something that showed they were obedient. Whatever it was, Jesus usually told people, go your way and don't tell anybody. But he knows what's coming. He knows his ministry is near. So if you'll notice here, he doesn't say, don't tell anybody. It just simply says that he touched their eyes and immediately their eyes received sight and they followed him. Would have been hard for them to follow him as blind men, wouldn't it? Would have been hard for them to have gotten around. Somebody would have had to have led them. It would have slowed everybody else up. All those things that we know about people that have physical ailments, whatever they might be. All those things don't have to keep us from Jesus. He is there. He's available. It's just a matter of us showing obedience, repenting, and looking at it with spiritual eyes. Jesus showed mercy to these blind men. If you remember back in the story about the wealthy landowner, he showed mercy. He showed grace. If you remember, I mentioned last week about those murmurers, that they were probably saying, well, we deserve more. We deserve to get paid more because you paid these that came in last. We've worked through the heat of the day. We've worked the longest period of time. So we deserve more than those that came in last. I can just hear the landowner, God, we know, saying, do you really want what you deserve? Do you really want what you deserve spiritually. Jesus showed mercy. Without that mercy, we're all in big trouble. So that finishes up that chapter. We'll stop there. I've got another song to close us out this morning, and hope to see y'all again next week if everything goes well.
Once there was a holy place, evidence of God's embrace, and I can almost see mercy's face pressed against the veil. Looking down with longing now, mercy must have realized that once His blood was sacrificed, freedom would prevail. And as the skies grew dark, the earth began to shake. Justice no longer in the way. Mercy came running like a prisoner set free. Past all my failures to the point of my need. The sin that I carried was all I could see. And when I could not reach mercy, mercy came running to me. Once there was a broken heart, waiting from the start, and all the years left it torn apart, hopeless and afraid.